25-year-old Chris Lopez enjoys these moments. It's still hard to believe the young dad has battled cancer.
It was a lot to take in. I was, at the time trying to finish college and working.
What's up, everybody? Mr. 707. I'm back to do another video, and we're going to tie this into my last two videos and pretty much the mantra of the entire channel in some aspects. I mean, we flip it up. We do some things that we also enjoy and that we like, but we also talk about things that we're passionate about, and that's self-improvement, not only for self, but for our communities in general, because ultimately that reduces the stress on ourselves and makes us more healthy when we can partake in communal self-improvement and an advancement of people and especially in the minority communities where there's some disadvantages. We want to focus on empowerment, not just in the minority communities, but for everyone in America. I believe wholeheartedly that one hand washes the other, and that we are a part of a greater community, whether we disagree or not, or agree or not. Some of these types of cancers are particularly high in the African American communities, but they're seeing upward trends in general. And so it's looking like it's dietary and lifestyle changes is what are big factors.
The chef was experiencing intense stomach pain, bleeding, and weight loss. It was months before he was sent for a colonoscopy. At just 30 years old, he was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer that would require chemotherapy and radiation to shrink a grapefruit-sized tumor before surgery. He had to tell his family just before Christmas.
Just thinking how short life is, because you don't know how much time you have left.
A new large study from the...
He's actually in a demographic who is at a potentially lower risk of this type of cancer. But as you can see, sometimes cancer doesn't distinguish. It just does what it does. And as we're learning, there's certain factors that we could prevent these incidents of higher rates of cancer. As I mentioned earlier, what could make it so shocking and devastating is that it can be totally preventable, but it's rare. It was typically seen as rare in that age group, and there's been a spike in cases and even deaths of young males who find out they have stage 4 cancer. And as I said, it's preventable if caught in the early stages, but that screening window was typically maybe 45 for the high risk, early 40s high risk, and then up to about 55 is when they were doing that screening. So if you were able to catch the early screening, maybe stage 2, stage 3, you have a higher chance of beating it. Stage 4 pretty much is one of almost terminal, I would guess. In stage 3, it can go into remission, but it could turn into a drawn out thing where it comes back. I would rather fight it as long as possible if I did have to deal with something like that, as opposed to finding out at stage 4. I'd want a much higher fighting chance to find out stage 2, stage 3 as he did. He's not fully out of window. He still has to do his lifestyle the correct way to maximize his chance of keeping it in remission. But it was just a total game changer, because they weren't screening people in his age group. He's not, and he's probably less likely to even go to see a doctor to even inquire about that type of screening, who are much younger than the typical demographic.
The American Cancer Society finds Generation X and Millennials have a higher risk of developing 17 cancers compared to older generations.
The risk for developing cancer, including colorectal cancer, uterine cancer, liver cancer, and breast cancer. You are more likely to develop cancer in your 30s and 40s if you were born in the 1990s and 1980s than your parents were, who were born in the 1950s and 1940s.
A step further, they're even saying the Gen X and Millennials have a higher risk of 17 types of cancers. So not only we're like 40 and up to start getting the screenings, and so they're finding people in their early 30s, maybe even late 20s with these cancers, and through their research, they've come to find out they're actually at a higher risk.
What's driving this trend, in your opinion? Do you know?
Yeah, we don't really know. It's likely an environmental aspect, whether that's diet, lack of exercise, some other exposure. And we do think that more research is needed in those areas.
Dr. Bill Dayhut says about 40% of cancers are preventable with certain behaviors, including not smoking and maintaining a healthy weight. He urges young people with persistent symptoms to talk to their doctor.
Don't ignore your symptoms. Get yourself checked. It can save your life, literally.
Lopez had no family history and genetic tests didn't show any risks. His cancer is now in remission, and he's grateful. Tom Hansen, CBS News, New York.
So it was just a quick piece. They didn't really touch on who's at higher risk. He quickly brushed on what factors are contributing to it. So I'm going to look at another video that came up next that talked about it a little more in depth. And then I'll give my conclusion on the matter and end the video.
Mike here, and today we're going to investigate the mystery of why colorectal cancer cases have more or less skyrocketed in people under 50. We have many news articles talking about doctors not knowing why this is happening. As I will say, it's not going to be a simple answer. What are the factors that could be causing this? Could it be microplastics, have to do with the gut, or some of those other classic colorectal cancer risks? How does smoking compare to processed meat consumption, for example?
Okay, he mentioned microplastics. I've heard of this type of thing. He did mention in the video that in third world countries where the instance of higher microplastic usage or contamination, they have a lower cases of this type of cancer. So it's, it could raise the risk, but what he's really going to dive into in the first point is the processed meats and cigarettes, which we was going to say the meats have a slightly higher chance. If in reality they're almost equal. So I mean, if you're using both, if you're eating that type of food in high quantities and smoking cigarettes, and if you're using tobacco products, and as Americans we tend to abuse things, it just puts you at a higher risk.
Example. I'll just give that one away. From this meta-analysis on younger cases specifically, processed meat was a worse risk factor than smoking for colorectal cancer. It appears those smoking and processed meat comparisons weren't so unhinged after all. So we're gonna look at over 30 studies in this video to try and get a clearer picture, modification, so at least we can start on that hopeful note. So let's get into it. But first of all, I just wanna say my apologies to anybody that's landed on this video because they or a loved one are dealing with this. That's rough, and good on you for seeking out information. I will say, I believe that this could happen to anybody, but that still shouldn't keep us from looking at things that can lower risk. Specifically, what we're talking about here is early onset colorectal cancer, which is under the age of 50. And while talking about this mysterious trend, yeah, we can see from the American Cancer Society, who used a cutoff age of 55, that the proportion of all cases under 55 has nearly doubled since 1998. Now, from cancer.gov, we're talking about the #1 cause of cancer death in men and #2 in women.
I thought that was important to note. I'm not sure. I mean, is he saying the #1 cause of cancer death in men is colorectal cancer? I believe that's what he just said. And so the topic of this article is the rise in this type of cancer in a younger demographic than what was previously thought to be.
But I think we need to zoom out here and first realize that this is happening in the face of some generally more positive trends. For example, the total colorectal cancer cases have gone down, likely due to less smoking as well as cancer screening. And with less smoking, lung cancer has sort of moved over to make way for another new top cancer. But yeah, this set of charts shows that in all ages, it's going down. But in the 20 to 49-year-olds, we see that notable increase, which is wild considering this is a time when smoking went down from.
So I'm not going to dive too deep into his video, but basically he did brush on the disparities as far as racial disparities of who is more likely to get this and who's having the spike in these cases. It's typically African-American men. It's linked to diet, inactivity, smoking. I would also throw in stress. But he did a good video. It's 22 minutes long, and he answered some questions that I believe the previous video didn't. He also touched on the fact that it's the processed meats, the evacuation time of the bowels. We should be having more frequent bowel movements, or daily bowel movements, more fibrous diet, less animal fat. He is a vegan channel, so he's going to push for that. So yeah, he also mentioned red meat, so limiting red meat, high fat diet, and high protein and carbs and low fiber would be a detrimental diet in this instance, because it's not conducive to regular bowel movements, which he mentioned that time of evacuation was also a factor. And something to do with E. coli and just bacteria on the walls of the colon too long. It's good to educate ourselves on health and well-being and prevention, and that way we can work together to help mitigate some of the issues that are plaguing our generations as so-called Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z. We're going to be the up-and-coming generation, so want to make sure that we are transitioning better into a more sustainable lifestyle. When we were younger, we can get away with things, maybe not exercising, smoking cigarettes. Ultimately, we will learn that it's better to prevent and not to use those things to begin with. But as our generation continues to age, we need to take time aside and not focus on the rat race and focus on personal well-being, and then our longevity. And their early 20s and your early 30s is only temporary. Then you're going to reach your 40s and 50s, and you have to develop your stride for the long haul. All right, everybody. This is Mr. 707, and I'm out.